This part is about fermentation or anaerobic respiration, and I really don't know whether to put it in the biochemical part or leave it in the fungal part, because it becomes very important when we start looking at what we do with fungi, how fungi work, and it also goes back to working how we deal with bacteria and some of the stuff we get out of bacteria. When we look at glycolysis ends up in pyruvic acid. Out of pyruvic acid, it's a 3-carbon unit that has got to be dealt with in some way or another. When we created the pyruvic acid, what we did was we used up 2 ATP. In the end, we made 4 ATP and we made 4 NADH. Normally, this goes through the Krebs cycle. It goes to acetyl-CoA, goes through the Krebs cycle, and down that way. But if the Krebs cycle backs up because the electron transport system backs up because there's no oxygen, then we have to have some sort of alternative pathway. And that's what this unit is about. It's about that alternative pathway that we call fermentation. In this, there are a couple of different ways that this can go. One is the enzyme lactase dehydrogenase comes in, uses up an NADH in order to do this. And this is one of the 2 we had that was made, so for every glucose, we're going to use up 2 NADH, and out of the lactase dehydrogenase, we create lactic acid. Now, lactic acid builds up in animal tissue, and it becomes quite problematic because out of that you get cramps and things like that. So it's not a good material to have built up. Eventually, it's going to get excreted, but what we really aren't getting out of this is we aren't getting any energy. All we've got are the 2 extra ATPs, but we don't have any NADH. The other pathway we can go through is a pathway where pyruvate gets decarboxylated using pyruvate decarboxylase, drives off a carbon dioxide, and as we get that, we get a material called acetaldehyde, and then the acetaldehyde can be transformed into other things. It says if you take the alcohol dehydrogenase in here, it will turn it into ethanol. All of a sudden, we've got ethanol, which can be a useful product, but again, we used up that NADH, so we have virtually nothing in the end as far as energy, but ethanol is produced by bacteria and fungi, and it's not necessarily something that we want to have build up, because it itself will become toxic as well. So in the concept of fermentation or anaerobic respiration, we have the conversion of pyruvate into one of 2 materials depending on the type of system we've got. When this happens, we often get fermentation. This is a barrel where they were fermenting grape juice, and you can see the little fermentation bubbler up on the top. If you looked at it, it was producing carbon dioxide, which was being released off, and it was bubbling up through this little tube. So we can use this, and we can make industrial products with it, and there are a lot of different things. Fermentation products, one of the fermentation products we get is alcohol. In this particular case, you're looking at some grapes. We harvest the grapes, we crush the grapes up, we put them in the barrel. After a certain period of time, by a very skillful hand, it turns into a bottle of wine or something along those lines. These are bottles of champagne that are being aged to have the proper culture of champagne in it, and then what they will do is they will actually take these bottles and they will remove the material that filters out of it. You take all of that, you make this real nice area where you can sell all this wine. But wine isn't the only fermentation product we have out of alcohol. As college students, you understand beer. And there's a lot of different kinds of beers, and some people like some beers better than others. I've been in stores that probably have 500 different kinds of beer, and I'm not sure if I'd call it all beer, considering the one of it was made out of pumpkin. So you look at that. The other thing we can do with alcohol is we can distill it. And as you distill it, you get what we would call a type of spirit. This is a very pretty bottle of gin that is made in South America, and it's an absolutely gorgeous bottle, and it's phenomenal material that comes out of it, and it's an alcohol type product. There are other types of fermentation products we get. This is household type products. Household type products include vinegar. That comes out of a fermentation product where the organism makes acetic acid. We often get this by taking things like old fruits, old apples that don't make it, and they turn into vinegar. Wine itself will turn into vinegar if not properly cared for. we could have a fermentation product like yogurt. And in yogurt, we use bacteria in order to be able to ferment this into this very interesting product. Here's one called nail polish remover. Acetone comes out of a certain type of bacterium. Not that you want to consume this, but it is made from microorganisms. Rubbing alcohol comes out of a fermentation product. Again, so we look at fermentation, and that becomes very, very interesting. Here's a totally different format of fermentation, and this is a fermentation where they were making a hard cheese. This is a Parmesan type cheese, only it was absolutely exquisite. They were aging this stuff for about 4 years on the shelf. The material was phenomenally good. And again, this happens with the fermentation product. This one is a slow process where they've got certain microorganisms on the inside, and it allows to equilibrate and do things very, very interestingly. So when we look at fermentation, fermentation is a process by which we create products because glycolysis couldn't go through the Krebs cycle, but rather it had to go in an alternative pathway.